These 8 ancient texts are the most remarkable remnants left of ancient Mesopotamia. They were recovered amongst 30,000 clay tablets within a once magnificent library that had been buried for thousands of years. Since their translation, these 8 texts have answered questions which we will uncover in this video. The Assyrian Empire would rule over the northern Mesopotamian lands for over 1,500 years. The last great king of the empire, Ashurbanipal, constructed a grand library which contained thousands of secrets of this once great empire. In 612 BC, a coalition led by the Babylonians would topple the reign of the civilization, and the king's extraordinary library went down in flames, leaving the empire's story a forever mystery. That is, until 1849. English archaeologist Austen Henry Layard returned from an excavation in modern-day Iraq, telling his people about his magnificent find. The fire which engulfed the now buried library had dried the clay tablets, preserving them for millennia. The library's chambers were excavated for years to follow, and 30,000 clay tablets would be translated. Ashurbanipal was a king known to torture and kill. Yet he never left his palace to go to battle. Instead, he stayed inside his palace walls and wrote. He'd spend the day studying the great tablets of clay his soldiers brought him, of which we will be exploring today. When Ashurbanipal was born in 685 BC, his path to the throne was not easy. His grandfather, King Sennacherib, was in power. After living the violent life of capturing Babylon for the Assyrians and brutally attacking Jerusalem, his life was coming to a close. Sennacherib's oldest son, Ashur-nadin-shumi, was deemed crown prince and would be their inevitable heir to the throne. However, this all changed when Ashur-nadin-shumi died of mysterious circumstances, leaving the question to be asked, who will be the next of Assyria? The most obvious choice would be Sennacherib's second eldest son, Artamulissi. However, for a reason lost to history, Sennacherib favored his younger son, Esarhaddon, to be the next king of Assyria. This plan of succession infuriated Artamulissi. With no other option, Artamulissi did what he had to do. On October 20th, 681 BC, he stabbed his father in his sleep, allowing him to be king after all. As the Assyrians were preparing for the coronation in Nineveh, Esarhaddon wasn't ready to give up. He raised an army of those still loyal to Sennacherib to usurp his brother, to live out the will of his dead father. As Esarhaddon's army came closer, Artamulissi tried to fight back. However, his efforts were futile and he was killed in action, allowing Esarhaddon to be king. As king, he wanted to make sure when he died, his children wouldn't result in the same bloodshed for power as he experienced. So he made it very clear that the crown prince would be his eldest son, Sin-nadin-apli. There was no debate, discussion, or conflict about who should take over until 674 BC, when Sin-nadin-apli died a tragic and unexpected death. In his state of grief, Esarhaddon knew that he had to do anything to ensure there wasn't another war within his family. So he reshaped the Assyrian Empire for the first time to have 2 kings, splitting up the empire. His second oldest son, Shamash-shum-ukin, would be declared king of Babylon. His 4th eldest son, Ashurbanipal, would be named king of Assyria. In May 672 BC, Shamash-shum-ukin and Ashurbanipal were coronated together, and the empire's future looked secure. Before Esarhaddon died, he created a particular succession plan with the brothers. Ashurbanipal was the primary heir to the empire, and Shamash-shum-ukin was to swear allegiance and be subservient to him. Still, Ashurbanipal was not to interfere in Shamash-shum-ukin's affairs in Babylon. The brothers agreed to this arrangement. Shamash went to Babylon, and Ashurbanipal went to the House of Succession. In Assyrian culture, it was deemed the state's highest importance to ensure the crown prince was trained and ready to take the reign of the Assyrian throne. To be an influential king, one must be a master of the bow and the pen. He became a warrior. He learned how to hunt, shoot an arrow, and ride a horse. While he also became a scholar, became a master in all scribal and priestly knowledge. He was able to read Sumerian and Akkadian scripts. He could read the most obscure stories in all cuneiform languages, and this knowledge made him hungrier for more. As Esarhaddon died in 669 BC, Ashurbanipal was ready to be king. He had the power of knowledge, the might of the sword, and the respect of the aristocrats. His grandmother Nakia wrote the Zakutu Treaty, which bound the royal family and all the aristocracy to swear loyalty to Ashurbanipal. As Ashurbanipal was taking charge, he had to keep the empire his father had created. A task easier said than done. The winners don't tell the history of the war, it's told by the ones crazy enough to preserve it. As Ashurbanipal continued on his warpath, the detailed records on the beautiful prism called the Rassam Cylinder. This prism is 10-sided, each with a different story written by Ashurbanipal about the conquests of his people. Hormuzd Rassam excavated the magnificent stone in 1854, and it's now viewable in the British Museum. To preface the contents described on this ancient stone, Esarhaddon, 2 years before he died in 671 BCE, had conquered all of Egypt from Kushite pharaoh Taharqa. However, as Esarhaddon died, many former loyal vassal rulers did not respect the new leadership, so Taharqa led a revolt across Egypt to kick out the foreign invaders. After Taharqa's army massacred the Assyrian garrison in Memphis, Ashurbanipal sent an army to quell the rebels. Their army didn't just consist of soldiers, they also consisted of scholars, who had the utmost important jobs of recording the war events and stealing the losers' clay tablets and papyrus writings. On the Rassam Cylinder, Ashurbanipal writes, "He, Taharqa, entered and took residence in Memphis, the city which my own father had conquered and incorporated into the Assyrian territory. A swift courier came to Nineveh and reported to me. At these deeds my heart became enraged and my soul cried out. I raised my hand in prayer to Ashur and the Assyrian Ishtar. I mustered my mighty forces, which Ashur and Ishtar had placed into my hands. Against Egypt and Ethiopia, I directed the march. In the course of my march, 22 kings of the seacoast, of the midst of the sea and mainland, servants subject to me, brought their rich presents before me and kissed my feet. Those kings, together with their forces on their ships by sea, on the dry lands with my armies, I caused to take path and road. To hurry aid to the kings, the governors who were in Egypt, servants subject to me. I hastily advanced, marching as far as Karbaniti. Taharqa, king of Egypt and Ethiopia, heard the advance of my army in Memphis, and mustered his fighting men against me, offering armed resistance in battle. With the help of Ashur, Bel, Nabu, the great gods, and my lords, who advanced at my side, I defeated his army in a battle on the open plain. Taharqa heard of the defeat of his armies while in Memphis. The terrible splendor of Ashur and Ishtar overcame him and he went mad. The glory of my majesty with which the gods of heaven and earth have crowned me overpowered him. He forsook Memphis and fled to save his life to Thebes. The city that I seized, I had my troops enter and occupy it. As Ashurbanipal's army went down into Thebes, he sacked it for all it's worth, plundering, stealing everything of value. From art to gold to Egyptian stone tablets, everything was taken. If it weren't for the diplomacy of Theban governor Mentuemhat, the city would have been destroyed. Thebes was allowed to survive, but barely. As the soldiers went home, the art went into the hands of the Assyrians. They formed the basis of Assyrian art and culture. While some Egyptian texts made it to the library, they were primarily written in papyrus. However, over the course of millennia, papyrus being a natural material, disintegrates into nothing after thousands of years. Another significant depiction found within the buried library is the monumental relief of the Battle of Ulai. The carvings found on the relief, as well as translations from the Rassam Cylinder, tell the story of when a neighboring city attempted to conquer Assyria and the violent events that unfolded. To preface, the Elamites under King Urtik were dealing with a nasty famine in 655 BC. They were struggling for food and power, so they made the tragic mistake and attacked Babylon. Ashurbanipal sent their armies and quickly quelled their invasion as Shamash-shum-ukin watched from the side. Ashurbanipal thought his older brother wasn't competent enough to handle an army, leaving Babylon fiercely dependent on the protection of Assyria proper. King Urtik of the Elamites died on his retreat. The Elamites had a succession problem of their own. Urtik's 3 sons retreated into the Assyrian mainland as the outsider Toyman seized power. The rise of Toyman is shrouded in mystery. However, his intention was clear: to take over Nineveh. Toyman demanded the extradition of Urtik's sons so he could deal with them, and when Ashurbanipal refused, his army marched onwards to Nineveh. Toyman wasn't alone though. He convinced Shamash-shum-ukin to turn against his brother and join the plight of the Elamites. As they marched to the banks of the Ulai River, Ashurbanipal's army was there and destroyed whatever remained of the hungry Elamite army. The Assyrian artisans created stone monuments of what happened for everyone to see. In a series of 6 stone carvings, you can see the full story of the Battle of Ulai. In the first carving, you can see Toyman wounded and his son, Tamaritu, trying to escape from the battlefield at Ulai. In the second, you can see the final shot that killed Toyman and Tamaritu. In the third, you can see the beheading of Toyman. In the fourth, you can see the Assyrian warrior holding the head in celebration. In the fifth, you can see the Assyrian soldiers rushing the head of Toyman to Nineveh. In the sixth, you can see Ashurbanipal and his queen dining a fancy meal while the head of Toyman was hanging from the tree. Around Ashurbanipal's palace, you can see these chaotic images of torture and death plastered on every wall, serving as a reminder that Ashurbanipal was to be feared and respected. However, his brother failed to do either. The next translation from the library of Ashurbanipal is called A Tale of Two Brothers, which describes Ashurbanipal and his brother Shamash-shum-ukin's future rivalry. The text tells us that after 16 years of adherence to the oath of loyalty to Ashurbanipal, Shamash-shum-ukin decided to rebel. His Babylonian subjects were deeply resentful of Assyrian domination and the unfair tributes imposed on them after the debacle with the Elamites. Informed by his spies, Ashurbanipal tried at first to drive a wedge between Shamash-shum-ukin and his followers to a delegation of Babylonians sent to dress them in embroidered garments to a sumptuous banquet to win them over. During this time, we see Ashurbanipal do anything he can to keep power peacefully. So, according to an Akkadian language legend in the library's heart called Saritra, we hear the story of their brotherly conflict. According to this legend, Ashurbanipal was born to be a gifted leader, while Shamash was cursed from the start. The year Ashurbanipal was born was a year of great success for the empire, while the year Shamash was born was a year of poverty and hunger. So Ashurbanipal sent Shamash over to Babylon as a consolation prize, with the sole purpose of his rule to be a vassal to Nineveh. However, Shamash had enough of this second-place brother treatment. So instead of providing a tribute of gifts through his emissaries, Shamash sends a strongly worded letter. Ashurbanipal is furious, so he sends for his sister Saritra and tells her all the great things he's done for his brother, how he appointed him governor, how he gave him gifts, and how his brother is cursed. Saritra agrees with Ashurbanipal and is sent to Babylon to reason with Shamash-shum-ukin. When she made it to Babylon, Shamash scoffs at her and tries to distract her by offering hospitality to her horse. Saritra, annoyed by this ploy, takes a stricter stance. She blames the quarrel between the two brothers on Shamash and demands that he return to Nineveh. If he refused, he would have no choice but to kill himself by setting fire. But yet, Shamash would not be budged. So Saritra returned to Nineveh, and the war began. Ashurbanipal's army came in with a bang. They were told to spare no life and to destroy everything. The siege was so violent that it left members of Babylon so hungry they were forced to eat their own children. As the army entered, a fire engulfed Babylon and Shamash stepped in, allowing the flames to burn him alive. We don't know how historically accurate this legend is, but what we do know is that Ashurbanipal and his army burned Babylon to the ground and stole all the sacred Babylonian tablets they could find from various scientific journals, censuses, and even the creation myth of the Babylonian people. Though we may have just heard of Shamash Shum-Ukin being burnt to ash, not all stories about Babylon ended that poorly. Some ended with the creation of humanity. Within the library's depths lay the sacred origin myth titled Enuma Elish. The story Enuma Elish, or translated to English, When on High, is the Babylonian creation myth on how the world was created. There was no rhyme, no meter, there wasn't that Shakespearean poetry we're used to. It was the story of how the world was created. Their entire story of creation was created in 7 sacred clay tablets clearly preserved. These are the first 8 lines of the story translated into English. When on high the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name. Not but primordial Apsu, their begetter, and Mama Tiamat, she who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body. No reed hut had been matted, no marshland had appeared, when no gods, whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined. Then it was that the gods were formed within them. Those words date back to 3 millennia BC, but we only have them because Ashurbanipal prioritized preserving texts like these. Now it's widely available online and you can read it. It's a wonderful tale that allows us to look deep within ourselves. Here's a summary. The Enuma Elish begins by describing the primal state of the universe, where the gods Apsu and Tiamat exist. Apsu represents fresh water, and Tiamat represents salt water. From their union, the younger gods are born. However, the noise of the younger gods disturbs Apsu and he decides to eliminate them. The god Ea, who represents wisdom and magic, learns of Apsu's plan and devises his own to save the younger gods. Ea casts a spell on Apsu, putting him into a deep sleep, and then kills him. Ea establishes his own dwelling place upon Apsu's lifeless body. Tiamat, grief-stricken by the death of Apsu, becomes filled with rage and desires vengeance. She creates an army of monsters, led by her new consort Kingu, and prepares to wage war against the younger gods. The younger gods, realizing the imminent threat posed by Tiamat, gather in fear and uncertainty. They search for a champion to confront Tiamat and save them from her wrath. The god Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon, volunteers for the task, but with a condition. In exchange for his help, Marduk demands to be recognized as the supreme ruler of the gods. The gods agree to Marduk's condition and bestow upon him incredible powers and weapons. Marduk confronts Tiamat in a fierce battle. He defeats her, using his weapons to pierce her body, capture her, and claim victory. After his victory, Marduk proceeds to create the universe from Tiamat's remains. He splits her body in 2, forming the heavens and the earth. Marduk establishes the order of the universe, settling the paths of the stars and planets, and assigns roles to the gods. He creates humanity from the blood of Kingu, the leader of Tiamat's army. The epic concludes with a hymn of praise to Marduk, celebrating his triumph over chaos and his establishment of order. Marduk becomes the chief deity of the Babylonian pantheon, and the other gods pledge their allegiance to him. What's fascinating about this myth is that it was born into violence. To further one cause, you have to go to war, like how Marduk had to go to war against Tiamat. If you want something in this world, you'll have to fight for it. Something Ashurbanipal is never afraid of. This is another translation from the Rasam Cylinder, where Ashurbanipal personally boasts of destroying the Elamite kingdom once again throughout this journal. As Shamash-shum-ukin was burning in flames, the Elamites went into a period of political turmoil, losing one king after another, unable to keep power. That's when Humbin-Haltash III was coronated as king. He faced the near impossible task of making Ashurbanipal think he was a threat, that he and his Elam Empire were not to be trifled with. In 647 BC, Ashurbanipal sent his armies in a blaze of glory against the Elamites and their capital city of Susa. As Ashurbanipal writes in on Rassam's cylinder, he exclaims, "Susa, the great holy city, abode of their gods, seat of their mysteries, I conquered according to the word of Ashur and Ishtar. I entered its palaces, I dwelt there in rejoicing. I opened the treasures where silver and gold, goods and wealth were amassed. I destroyed the ziggurat of Susa. I smashed its shining copper horns. In Shushanak, god of the oracles, who resides in the secret places where no man sees his divine nature, with their jewelry, their wealth, their furniture, with the priests, I brought as booty to the land of Ashur. I reduced the temples of Elam to naught. Their gods, their goddesses, I scattered to the winds. The secret groves where no outsider had ever penetrated, where no layman had ever trod. My soldiers entered, they saw their mysteries, they destroyed them by fire. The tombs of their ancient and recent kings who had not feared my goddess Ishtar, my lady, and who were the cause of torments to the kings, my fathers. Those tombs I devastated, I destroyed, I exposed to the sun, and I carried away their bones toward the land of Ashur. I devastated the provinces of Elam, and on their lands I spread salt." Ashurbanipal made it very clear he did not value the secrets of the Elamites. Sure, he took home the gold and the jewelry. Those are the things that fade with time. But the things that can be immortal, the thoughts, the ideas, the clay tablets, his soldiers burned them down with the flame of anonymity, losing their stories to the great taker of them all, war and time. We don't have much more records of the Elamites after that. Ashurbanipal didn't stay to govern the city, rather he let it fall to its demise. Humbin-Haltash was quickly deposed and sent to Assyria to die in prison somewhere. Elam quickly fell apart after this massacre, and in 646 BC, it died off, disappearing altogether from the historical record. If there is one thing to be learned from this epic tale, it's that history is told by the winners. Ashurbanipal won, and he told his story. The Battle of Susa was a tragedy. A Sumerian myth found within the library about the wise fisherman Adapa helps explain why it happened. Parts of the story were initially found within Egypt from the archives of King Amenophis IV in the 1300s BC. By 1912, 3 tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal completed the tale, The Epic of Adapa. According to the myth, Adapa was a skilled fisherman who spent his days on the sea, providing fish for the temple of the god Enki, Ea. One day, while Adapa was fishing, a mighty wind arose and capsized his boat. In a rage, Adapa broke the wings of the south wind, which caused the wind to cease its fury. Adapa's actions caught the god's attention, and he was summoned to appear before Anu, the supreme god of the heavens. Ea, who was both Adapa's creator and protector, warned him of the potential dangers he might face, and advised him on how to behave in the presence of the gods. Ea instructed Adapa to dress in mourning attire and to refuse any food or drink offered to him in the divine assembly, as it would please the gods. He believed that by doing so, Adapa should gain eternal life and godlike status. Adapa followed Ea's instructions, but when he stood before Anu, the king of the gods offered him the bread of life and the water of life as a gesture of goodwill. Unfortunately, Adapa, acting upon Ea's advice, refused the food and drink, believing they were intended to deceive him. However, unbeknownst to Adapa, the food and drink he rejected were not meant to harm him, but were the means through which the gods bestowed immortality upon mortals. As a result of his refusal, Adapa missed his chance to attain eternal life and was condemned to live as a mortal. The people of Elam weren't thinking about being remembered. Rather, they were worried about the potential dangers they might face. Hence, they're forgotten. While Ashurbanipal had no idea he was being presented with the bread of life, his actions and his story will still be remembered even to this day. After the raising of Elam, Ashurbanipal started to become ill and weaker. His army still terrorized the lands of the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula, continuing their rampage. However, much of what happens after 646 BC largely remains a mystery. After 639 BC, only 2 inscriptions by Ashurbanipal are known, a sharp contrast to the abundant records of the prolific writer. In one of his last inscriptions, he writes, "I cannot do away with the strife in my country and the dissensions in my family. Disturbing scandals oppress me always. Illness of mind and flesh bow me down. With cries of woe I bring my days to an end. On the day of the city god, the day of the festival, I am wretched. Death is seizing hold upon me and bears me down." In 631 BCE, Ashurbanipal was no more. He had passed away, only with his library to carry on his legacy. Outside the library, an inscription reads, "I, Ashurbanipal, king of the universe, on whom the gods have bestowed intelligence, who has acquired penetrating acumen for the most recondite details of scholarly erudition, none of my predecessors having any comprehension of such matters, I have placed these tablets for the future in the library at Nineveh for my life and for the well-being of my soul, to sustain the foundations of my royal name." For 20 years, scholars worldwide traveled to read these texts secured in a grand library. They came to reach enlightenment. They came to learn ancient secrets. They came to be better people. But yet, in life, Ashurbanipal has made many enemies. His cruel, barbaric ways made the city of Nineveh and the Assyrian Empire a target for war. Once subjugated by the Assyrians, the Babylonians yearned for freedom and the restoration of their ancient city, Babylon. The Medes, fierce warriors from the east, sought to regain their lost territories and reassert their dominance. And the Scythians, nomadic horsemen, coveted the fertile lands held by the empire. Led by courageous leaders, this unlikely alliance struck with precision. Swift and relentless, they launched a series of coordinated attacks against the Assyrians. Wave after wave, they breached the empire's defenses, surprising their adversaries with ferocity and determination. The Assyrians, caught off guard by the united front against them, faced multiple defeats and invasions. Their once impregnable cities trembled under the assault, their subjects rising against their oppressors. Panic swept through the ranks of the Assyrian army as their grip on the empire began to slip. But the pinnacle of this coalition's triumph came with the infamous siege of Nineveh, the grand capital of the Assyrian Empire. Like an impregnable fortress, Nineveh had stood tall for centuries, symbolizing the Assyrian might. The coalition besieged the city, encircling it with their armies. For months, they laid siege to Nineveh, battering its defenses and cutting off its supplies. Fear and desperation spread inside the city as the once proud Assyrians realized their days of glory were ending. Finally, in the year 612 BCE, the fateful day arrived. The coalition breached the city walls, unleashing their armies upon Nineveh. Streets once filled with the clatter of Assyrian soldiers echoed with the triumphant cries of the invaders. With the flame of anger came the end of the Assyrian Empire. When they saw the sights of the library of Ashurbanipal, they burnt it down with a flame of hate. They wanted his memory to die. They wanted his brutal acts to disappear. They wanted his narcissistic claim to be over. They burned it to the ground, hoping it would never be seen again. However, these invaders forgot one thing: chemistry. By burning the library down, the clay tablets started to react to the fire and partially bake, just like a pot in a kiln, allowing them to be preserved and stand the test of time. As they wanted to destroy any remnants of Ashurbanipal, they've actually made them, in effect, immortal. For centuries, the library was just merely a myth passed along by scholars, a treasure trove of knowledge that can't be found. Generations have gone by, the world has changed. Civilizations began to rise and fall. Civilizations like Great Britain began their conquest of the world to find every corner of the earth and claim it for themselves. And in 1849 AD, the British had an empire that spanned the world and an army of archaeologists that would go wherever they pleased. Austen Henry Layard, a renowned British archaeologist, was tasked with leading the British force across the ancient lands of Nineveh to see what remnants they could find. In 1849, he found the royal palace of Sennacherib under rubble. When he found the first tablets in 1850, Austen exclaimed, "The chambers I am describing appear to have been a depository for such documents. To the height of a foot or more from the floor, they were entirely filled with them, some entire, but the greater part broken into fragments." Though Austen loved studying the Assyrians, he found the appeal of British politics and left Nineveh to pursue a political career. In his absence, he left his Ottoman assistant Hormuzd Rassam in charge. He continued the dig and found numerous tablets, including the stories of Enula Elis, Adapta, and, of course, the Rassam cylinder. With the permission of the Ottoman Empire, Rassam took the tablets back to the controversial British Museum. Like the original looting of Babylon, Rassam carried the clay like a souvenir. He didn't bother to keep the tablets in any order or track where they were initially found, just like the ancient Assyrian soldiers who did the same in ancient Babylon many years ago. Though many archaeologists now criticize Rassam for his lack of documentation, creating many questions that are still unknown to this day. These tablets were written in various Akkadian and cuneiform languages that are rarely spoken, and that only the most advanced and dedicated of people would have understood. That's when a young George Smith came on the scene. During the day, he had a monotonous job of being a banknote engraver, though whenever he had the chance, he ran to the British Museum reading whatever texts and tablets they had, becoming a self-taught cuneiform expert. The museum noticed his passion and finally hired him to achieve his dream job, to be an Assyrianologist. His task was to order and rejoin fragmented tablets into their original shape. Little did he know that one day, as he was sorting out the fragments, he discovered a story about a flood and the quest for immortality. Though a piece was missing tragically, the undeterred Smith still wanted to claim this discovery. After he gave a speech about his discovery in front of Prime Minister William Gladstone, he was sponsored to go to Nineveh and find the missing fragment. Within days of arriving, he found the missing parts, and it turns out to be the oldest extant work in human history, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This classic story was written long before the times of Ashurbanipal, Esarhaddon, or Sennacherib. It's a story that dates back to 2100 BCE. However, there are many different retellings of this classic tale. The most complete one was found in the library of Ashurbanipal, and is known as the Standard Babylonian Version. Through Smith's work, they recovered 11 clay tablets that tell the story of Gilgamesh. In the first tablet, we meet Gilgamesh, the 2/3 god, 1/3 man who was the king of Uruk. Despite his god status, Gilgamesh was despised. He forced women who are marrying someone else to sleep with him on their wedding night in a practice known as the Lord's Rite. He forced men to fight in dangerous games to entertain him. The people of Uruk got angry and prayed to the gods to do something about this tyrant. Listening to their prayers, the gods decided to create an equal to Gilgamesh, a god-man named Enkidu. At first, Enkidu was very unkempt, but after 2 weeks with a temple priestess, he became civilized and understood the fate of humanity. While in the second tablet, Enkidu hears about the crimes committed by Gilgamesh and challenges him to fight right outside a wedding chamber. After a fierce battle, Gilgamesh was deemed the winner. However, they still had mutual respect, so Gilgamesh proposes going into the cedar forest and slaying the monstrous demigod Humbara. Despite Enkidu's protest, Gilgamesh decides to go anyway. In Tablet 3, they receive advice from Gilgamesh's mother, the goddess Ninsun. They also begin to worship the sun god Shamash heavily, the god that Shamash-Shum-Yukin was named after. In the 4th tablet, Gilgamesh and Enkidu journey off into the cedar forest. Gilgamesh was paranoid of terrifying dreams about falling mountains and wild bulls, though Enkidu was convinced they were good omens. In the 5th tablet, the demigod Humbaba threatens to destroy the two challengers in battle. Though Gilgamesh is scared, Enkidu says encouraging words, and with the help of Shamash, they were able to kill Humbaba and establish their reputation forever. In Tablet 6, the goddess Ishtar is impressed with the acts of Gilgamesh and tries to seduce him. However, she fails and instead threatens to send the bull of heaven to Uruk to cause devastation among the people of Uruk. The bull lowers its head in the Euphrates and opens up a vast pit that swallows 300 men. Without any divine assistance, Enkidu and Gilgamesh attack, slay it, and offer its heart to Shamash. When Ishtar cries, Enkidu hurls one of the bull's hindquarters at her. The city of Uruk celebrates, but Enkidu has an ominous dream about his painful future. In Tablet 7, Enkidu learns of his imminent demise. For 12 days he suffers, and then by the end, he dies an unheroic death while Gilgamesh is in denial. In Tablet 8, Gilgamesh delivers a lament and calls everyone to mourn for Enkidu. In Tablet 9, Gilgamesh is now terrified of his death. He decides to seek Utnapishtim to learn the secret of eternal life. He begins on a long journey to see one of the few survivors of the Great Flood. In the 10th tablet, Gilgamesh meets Urshanabi, who instructs Gilgamesh to cut down 120 trees and fashion them into punting poles. When they reach the island where Utnapishtim lives, Gilgamesh recounts his story, asking him for his help. Utnapishtim reprimands him by saying, "Gilgamesh, where are you roaming? You will never find the eternal life that you seek. When the gods created mankind, they also created death, and they held back eternal life for themselves alone. Humans are born, they live, then they die. This is the order that the gods have decreed. But until the end comes, enjoy your life. Spend it in happiness, not despair. Savor your food. Make each of your days a delight. Bathe and anoint yourself. Wear bright clothes that are sparkling clean. Let music and dancing fill your house. Love the child who holds you by the hand, and give your wife pleasure in your embrace. That is the best way for a man to live." In the 11th and final tablet, Gilgamesh tells Utnapishtim, "I have been looking at you, but your appearance is not strange. You are like me. You yourself are not different. You are like me." Utnapishtim then describes how he survives a great flood designed to kill all of humanity. After surviving the flood and all the attempts to kill him, the god Enlil tells Utnapishtim, "Previously, Utnapishtim was a human being, but now let Utnapishtim and his wife become like us, the gods. Let Utnapishtim reside far away at the mouth of the rivers." However, Gilgamesh wanted to be immortal, so Utnapishtim challenged him to lay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh fell asleep instantly, unable to ever achieve the quest he so desires. How can one be immortal if one can't stay awake for a week? As Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, slated to die, his story ends. Though his legacy will never die, his story was told throughout the ancient world and made it into 11 clay tablets that were placed in Ashurbanipal's library. Forever, Gilgamesh will remain immortal in our minds. So will Ashurbanipal, though he died many, many years ago. His legacy of being a warrior scholar will be remembered forever, from his attacks on Babylon to the preservation of the text. The story of Ashurbanipal will live on. Ashurbanipal's life was one of controversy, bloodshed, and theft. He destroyed civilizations and tortured people, though without him, we would never know the story of Gilgamesh. the conflicts of Sennacherib and Esarhaddon, or the destruction of the Elamites. Though this video may be nearing its conclusion, his story isn't done. Today, many scholars are dedicating their lives to discovering more mysteries left in these ancient clay tablets. At the University of Pennsylvania, the Ashurbanipal Library Project is trying to digitally recreate all cuneiform tablets so that anyone worldwide can access them. They aren't just recording the stories we've heard, but also trying to decipher other informational texts. In a program called Introducing Assyrian Medicine, Healthcare Fit for a King, scholars are trying to decipher the medical tablets in the library to see if we can find any useful medical advice from our ancient brethren and to document how they treated sick patients. Another program called Reading the Library of Ashurbanipal, jointly sponsored by the British Museum and the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, is tasked with finding out how the library was configured and functioned as a whole. Questions that we don't have the answer to today. Though Ashurbanipal may have been dead for a long time, his story will live on forever, leaving him to be forever immortal.